Something happened today that should shake every leader awake. A truth was spoken. A truth most people are too afraid to say out loud. It wasn't wrapped in comfort. It wasn't softened for fragile egos. It was a mirror held up to every organization, every team, every individual who claims they want to lead, innovate, or make a difference. And the message was simple. We are running out of time. Running out of time to fix toxic cultures. Running out of time to build trust. Running out of time to stop pretending we're doing our best when, deep down, we know we're playing small. What was said today wasn't just bold. It was necessary because the world is shifting at a speed we've never seen, and the only leaders who will survive are the ones willing to confront the uncomfortable truths about how we work, how we lead, and how we show up. Today, we're going to confront those truths together, not tomorrow, now. The real danger isn't that men are doing too little. It's that many are doing everything except what truly matters. We have mistaken constant motion for genuine progress, filling our days with tasks, goals, and distractions that keep us looking productive, while quietly avoiding the deeper work that actually moves us forward. Men often feel pressured to appear strong, decisive, and in control, so they rush to solve problems and stack accomplishments, believing speed equals success, when in reality speed often hides insecurity. Women see this pattern more clearly than we realize, because from the outside, the frantic pace looks less like leadership and more like a desperate attempt to outrun doubt. The busy man looks committed, but he is often overwhelmed, operating from fear rather than vision. And when fear drives the engine, urgency becomes a costume, loud, dramatic, and empty on the inside. Women feel the emotional distance this creates, while men feel the internal chaos they don't know how to express. Real urgency isn't frantic, it's focused. It comes from a deeper place of purpose, something both men and women can sense instantly. When a man stops performing productivity and starts pursuing meaning, he shifts from reacting to leading, from exhaustion to intention, and everyone around him feels the difference. The greatest threat to any team isn't incompetence or lack of resources, it's the absence of trust that everyone feels but no one dares to name. Men often carry a silent weight, the belief that trust must be earned through flawless performance, steady confidence, and emotional restraint. So they hold back their doubts, hide their weaknesses, and present a version of themselves they think others expect. This creates a surface-level stability that looks strong but feels hollow, because the team senses the gap between what is shown and what is real. Women notice this disconnect faster, not because they judge it, but because they feel the emotional temperature of a team shift when transparency disappears. When men retreat behind competence, women experience it as distance, unpredictability, or a lack of emotional availability. And when that pattern becomes the norm, a team stops sharing openly, stops asking for help, and stops admitting when something isn't working. Trust erodes quietly, not through conflict, but through the absence of honest human connection. The truth is that teams don't break because someone made a mistake. They break because people feel unsafe telling the truth. When men let themselves be seen, not perfect, not invincible, just real, they create a psychological permission that everyone, especially women, immediately recognizes and responds to. That moment is when trust shifts from an ideal to a lived reality, and the team finally discovers how strong it can actually be. Most people don't struggle because they lack motivation. They struggle because motivation was never designed to carry the weight we put on it. Men are often taught to push harder, toughen up, and rely on sheer willpower, as if discipline alone can anchor a meaningful life. But when a man's motivation comes from pressure, comparison, or the fear of falling behind, it burns fast and dies quietly. That's why so many men feel exhausted, even while doing everything right, because they're fueled by adrenaline, not purpose. Women see this cycle play out in real time, noticing how men swing between intensity and withdrawal, between big promises and quiet burnout. The inconsistency doesn't come from a lack of ambition. It comes from chasing goals that never matched their deeper values in the first place. Women understand that when a man feels disconnected from meaning, his drive becomes unpredictable, and his emotional presence weakens. This doesn't make him weak. It makes him human. People aren't inspired by pressure. They're inspired by alignment, by knowing why they're doing something and who they're becoming in the process. When a man reconnects with something deeper, something he believes in, not something he's trying to prove, his energy stops fluctuating. Both men and women sense the shift immediately because inspiration has a calmness to it that motivation never will. the most dangerous myth in leadership isn't about strategy or skill. It's the belief that leaders must always have the answers. Men especially are taught from a young age that leadership means certainty, authority, and flawless decision-making. So they posture, pretend, and push through moments of doubt as if admitting uncertainty would somehow make them unworthy of being followed. This creates leaders who look confident on the outside but carry silent pressure on the inside constantly, afraid of being exposed as imperfect. Women experience the fallout of this myth differently because they often see through the facade long before men realize they're wearing one. They notice the emotional rigidity, the subtle withdrawal, the moments when a man stops listening because he's too busy protecting his image. And while they don't expect perfection, they do expect honesty. Yet the myth tells men that vulnerability is a liability. This creates a disconnect. Women sense a leader retreating behind performance, while men feel trapped inside a role they're afraid to step out of. The lie we've believed is that leadership is about strength without softness, direction without dialogue, certainty without curiosity. But real leadership emerges when a man understands that people don't follow him because he's always right. They follow him because he's willing to be real, to learn, and to lead from a place of humanity rather than ego. The collapse of a culture never begins with a dramatic moment. It starts with a single small compromise that feels harmless. In the moment. Men often make these compromises quietly, believing they're doing what's necessary to keep things moving, overlooking a small misalignment, excusing a disrespectful comment, or ignoring their own discomfort because they don't want to appear difficult or emotional. These subtle concessions accumulate, shaping an environment where people adapt to what's tolerated rather than what's right, and the integrity of the culture slowly erodes without anyone noticing. Women frequently sense these shifts earlier, not because they are more critical, but because they often feel the emotional ripple effects more immediately. They see how a single overlooked behavior becomes permission for bigger violations, how a moment of silence becomes a pattern of acceptance, and how the emotional safety of a space starts to weaken long before the men around them recognize it. From their perspective, the culture doesn't break suddenly. It leaks slowly, like a subtle draft that eventually turns into a storm. The truth is that the first compromise rarely looks dangerous. It simply opens the door. For men, agreeing to something that violates their values can feel like an act of humility or sacrifice, but internally it creates tension, resentment, and a slow distancing from the team. Women notice the shift in tone, in energy, in how present or withdrawn men become when they're living out of alignment. And when these moments repeat, even in small ways, the culture transforms. Less trust, less courage, less ownership, until the environment no longer reflects the ideals it once promoted. A culture doesn't deteriorate because of one big failure. It deteriorates because people stop protecting the small things that once defined who they were. The hardest moment in leadership isn't when things go wrong. It's when the path forward becomes unclear and every instinct screams for certainty that simply isn't there. Men often feel a deep internal pressure in these moments, conditioned to believe they must be the rock everyone can lean on, the steady voice, the unwavering decision maker. Yet the truth they rarely say aloud is that uncertainty feels like failure, as if not knowing the next step means they're unfit to lead. This creates an emotional conflict, wanting to be honest, but fearing the judgment that honesty might bring. Women experience these moments differently, often sensing the emotional undercurrent before a man ever expresses it. They notice the subtle tension in his voice, the shift in his presence, the way he becomes more rigid, more controlling, or more withdrawn when clarity disappears. Women don't expect men to have all the answers. What they long for is connection and honesty, not perfection. But the pressure men feel to shield others from uncertainty often creates distance instead of unity, leaving women feeling excluded from the real conversation. Leadership in the fog requires a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't rely on knowing, but on showing up anyway. Men who embrace this shift begin to understand that people aren't inspired by certainty. They're inspired by courage. They're inspired by the willingness to walk into the unknown with openness instead of armor, with curiosity instead of fear. And when a man leads this way, he creates a space where others, especially women, feel invited to contribute, collaborate, and co-create the path forward. The real courage is not in pretending to be unshakable. It's in allowing others to see that uncertainty doesn't diminish you, it humanizes you. When a man chooses presence over perfection, he becomes the kind of leader people trust not because he knows the way, but because he's willing to walk it with them.